This video isn't going to be a summary of the book, as I don't think I can summarize it or give. I don't think I can give you what the book can. This video is just a retelling of how I came to read Man's Search for Meaning and why I believe half of the self improvement industry has been dedicated to trying to rewrite this book 500 different ways. With every single time, it's just worse than Man's Search for Meaning. So this all kind of starts out. Last year was probably the worst year of my life. It kind of felt like this meme where God was just trying to spike me off of rock bottom as many times as possible within a calendar year. January to December was just like a barrage of every month I was granted a major among many minor problems. Not going too into detail as to not dox myself, but a little bit of testicular torsion here, a little bit of coolant getting mixed up into your car oil there, my entire social and family life blowing up. Yeah, last year was pretty rough. But honestly, it kind of felt like everything was manageable. It felt like everything I've gone through in my life weirdly prepared me for last year. It was just a lot of juggling different aspects of my life and things that I think I'm pretty good at. That being said, the experience of last year was kind of like being stuck in the range of one of those frenzy flame towers in Elden Ring, but with no cover, just feeling my madness bar slowly tick up, and I lose my mind once a week or so, and then you just keep going, and that's it. That is until about October. October was particularly bad for me after having had a undiagnosed brief period of psychosis, which I really wasn't sure about since it was really just me brawling with extremely delusional thoughts about a new social setting I was placing myself in for the entire week prior. What confirmed it was when I spent about 20 minutes in a Discord call with the boys where I was just muted because I was searching my house because I could have sworn that I heard people walking around when I was supposed to be home alone. I even heard a house party up my street when I've never, ever heard a house party on my street. It just made no sense. Then, like a light bulb, I remembered that I took a gander at the DSM-5 and I was like, oh, none of this is real. I'm just hallucinating. Side note, after that, when I was going to bed, I watched this video. That was a bad time. I should not have done that, if you were wondering. But yeah, I just tanked it. I waited it out, and, I was good as new. Until November, where all of my side projects stopped working inexplicably, and I had experienced what Dr. K talks about here in terms of thwarted belongingness twice in a row within a week.
And if you look at the statistics on suicide, it's very interesting. So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression, and this is super scary. There's one study I saw recently that suggests that 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. And this, I believe the statistic in my clinical practice because I know what depression looks like. I know what bipolar disorder looks like. And half the men that I've worked with, at least, are not actually mentally ill. See, mental illness means a pathology of the mind, which means that the mind is malfunctioning. Most of the suicidal men that I work with, their mind isn't malfunctioning. They genuinely have a life that is no longer worth living. They're looking at things and objectively realizing that there's no way out of this situation. So they turn to suicide. So I know it's kind of like a very controversial statement, but I think that's what my clinical practice has shown, and there's some research to even back that up. So if we sort of look at what's going on with men, we're sort of, they have nowhere to turn to. And the number one thing that correlates with it is not mental illness, but is a sense of thwarted belongingness. So this is kind of like multivariate regression analysis. But basically what happens is what causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. So it's specifically a very specific research term called thwarted belongingness. So I try to belong to a group, and that group, or multiple groups usually, will thwart my attempts to join the tribe, to join the community. And this is what actually correlates a lot with suicidality. So what's going on with men right now is that we really don't allow them to suffer, because then you're not manly. And we're so externalized with our attention that we're not connecting with ourselves. And so we're looking to other people to tell us what it means to be a man. But that may or may not work for you, right? That may have been what worked for them. So then we kind of get into this problem where we're disconnected from ourselves. And then the world doesn't accept us. We're not allowed to suffer. And that's what creates the problem.
I had the week off at that point, and I ended up just being mostly completely despondent and catatonic the whole week. It felt like God was just trying to rip away everything I had going for me in my life. Conflicting thoughts filled my mind since, that isn't necessarily true. I'm in a very, very fortunate financial situation, and I have mostly good health. But thoughts like that don't really assuage the feelings that I was having, like having a giant stake being driven through my chest like I'm pinned to the ground that I can't get it out. As with all things, time heals all wounds. After about 3 or 4 days, I was back to normal functioning the next week. But I don't think that emotional damage, things of that nature, I don't think that was fully healed. I think it was just numbed and forgotten for the time being. Last aside, before I get into the book, personally, I have no problem talking about stuff like this after it's passed. But at the time, I think I'd rather be caught dead than admit I'm struggling with something. Even then, if I am to be candid, I don't feel like anyone around me would understand what I struggle with in a very, daredevil dog meme-esque way. Not to say that that's right, or whatever. That is an egotistical statement that I don't give much credence to, but that is what I feel. Or how I felt, I guess. I don't know, man. I paint you this picture to tell you where I was going into reading Man's Search for Meaning. I truly don't think that I or anyone else can summarize or interpret this book better than just telling you to read it yourself. So my intention here is to just tell you what it did for me. And then I think if you're coming at it from a similar angle from where I was, you might get a lot out of it. Originally, I was going to listen to the audiobook on Spotify, but just listening to the preface, I was taken aback by how similar what the author was describing in an interview sounded to my experience and what a lot of Gen Z people are experiencing. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to claim that mine or the average Gen Z person's life is comparable to living in a concentration camp, but some aspects have parallels, particularly the mechanisms by which our minds operate under. In the concentration camps, the prisoners didn't know how long they would be imprisoned. They had no reasonable hope for the future. So with the small amounts of additional pay that they got for hard labor, they had the chance to exchange it for bread or cigarettes. The prisoners would often opt for cigarettes, picking any method to cope for their current reality. The majority of Gen Z people feel like with their current wages and current asset prices, getting on the financial ladder and following the same path that our parents and grandparents did simply is not feasible. So why not just blow it on DoorDash or YOLO on Dogecoin? The opportunity cost appears low enough anyway, so why not? I don't do that, and those are both very bad ideas. You shouldn't do either of those things. They're very bad for you. Again, I think I should say, that isn't to say that Gen Z people are equivalent to concentration camp prisoners. That would be insanely stupid of me to claim. But the mental mechanisms are similar enough. An observation that I found striking enough to immediately drop the audiobook and get the real thing. Reading things physically is way better for retention and can often have better results for enjoyment. If I may be a shameless plug, I made a video on this after I had that experience. And that's where I stop explaining anything of what the book says. I can drop baller quotes, but none of it would hit as hard as the context that the book surrounds itself in. Which brings me to today. It's been about 2 months since I finished the book. Honestly, might be the most helpful thing I've ever read in my entire life. All of last year, I made a playlist to kind of track my experience of the year, where I could look back in the order that I added the songs, and I could kind of remember what was going on in my life at that time. And it's kind of hilarious. If you look at it, you can observe a pretty clear ping-ponging from great to abysmal moods. You know, it's literally just the "it's so over, we're so back" graph. You can just plot over it and it checks out. I spent most of my life, and specifically last year, trying to figure out how to live the best and happiest life. I watched so many podcast videos, other self-improvement media, but none of it felt lasting to me. None of it felt right. It may seem like an exaggeration, but I mean it when I say it. Purpose in living a good life, no matter the conditions, just reading Man's Search for Meaning, it solved it. It's just been a solved issue for 80 years. Everybody who's been talking about either of those things are just doing it worse and less complete than Man's Search for Meaning. This is some crazy glaze, but you gotta understand. For the last 2 months, I don't have highs or lows anymore. I just have days. I do my best every day. Sometimes that looks different, and I'm okay with that. Like a light switch, the book just full paradigm shifted me from this guy into this guy. And it's been sustained too. I've been like a noticeably better person and happier since I finished the book. I just enjoy my life and challenging things more now. That can be attributed to my note-taking and integration of the book's concepts, but I don't think I'm special. I think anybody would get the same thing out of Man's Search for Meaning if they're coming from a similar point of view. So if my intro section describing how my experience of 2025 and like any of what I said sounded relatable, or like if you have a thought that you can recognize as kind of like a Daredevil, like could be reacted to with a Daredevil dog meme, and you're like, yeah, that's a little cringe, but it's just like, I think you should pick up Man's Search for Meaning and read it as soon as possible. But yeah, that's all I got. Just go read the book. It's better than anything my dumbass would say.